So I want to explore the way how an NPC is given towards the deep fake that people ultimately become when, say for instance, that the narrative that is accepted for the NPC starts to break, and so what is catered is other narratives that ultimately support or buttress the paradigm. So the paradigm is not beholden to narrative capture, but it allows its proliferation. If, say, for instance, that you understand that an NPC dismouths accepted, say, narratives or regurgitates propaganda, does the orientation is, say, an arc for the development of what is an NPC, a deep fake. And so when you're looking at, say, narratives, then you supplement the main narrative with other ones, and so therefore it allows divergence, but that divergence is still contained. And so ultimately, because then in that way what happens is that any person that lays claim that they're not an NPC, that they are engaged with, say, knowledge or understanding the way how the world works, is always in reference to what is accepted as the common narrative. And so through doing so, if they proclaim knowledge, does their status as a algorithmic, say, artifact become more problematic from the aspect of ultimately dealing with the way how the world works? And so, because if these narratives buttress the main one, then its niches are catered for, as I always talk about when a buyer's journey's been set for life. You're just looking at the way how you can market difference for people not to question for people not to question what it means to be a consumer. So it has nothing to do with the way how that you consume your time or the way you invest yourself in a narrative. And it doesn't matter whether or not it's a mainstream one or if it's aberrant, as it were. The issue is the fact that you do that. And so what happens is that upgrade from the NPC to the deep fake is set for, say, a progression, but because people invest themselves in their knowledge, they don't understand the way how that this precludes questioning. The NPC is given towards becoming a deep fake through the proclamation of knowledge that they attain through their searching, but that in turn discounts the thinking of their existential status when they're given as a credit instrument or a demand center. So once again, that presupposes to ask the question of the way how you produce yourself. So if you don't ask that, then what happens is it enables you to be dissatisfied with being an NPC or being Nietzsche's last man, to engage in questioning. And this can relate to philosophy, it can relate to Nietzsche as well, because the majority of people that talk about Nietzsche or any philosopher don't actually give it down into practical things of what actually you need to do to transform the self and ultimately to create a world beyond your own captivation, as it were. There's never anything that's offered. That would be a creative enterprise. So if it's not orientated towards that end, then what end is it other than just to spend your time to no end or never outside the totalizing claim of a buyer's journey, or the fact that time's given to you as an economic good, so a resource used to produce the form of life of the consumer, so you can spend your time listening to somebody talk shit. So that blind spot enables development, or what would be growth, but it's ultimately not growth of the self. You could say that it's orientated towards growth, but there is an impasse, obviously, that these say threads or these niches cater for. So once again, the question is primary in order to give context to that. And so if that question is completely jettisoned or discounted, then ultimately they are dead ends, and the impasse will remain. But what happens here in the context of, say, creating, say, ways of knowing in reference to the way how the world works? if people are orientated towards questioning the way how the world works, and yet they discount the production process of themselves as an interchangeable economic unit or a demand centre, then what that enables is a cacophony of voices that are fighting over ultimately nothing, because they buttress each other and so therefore maintain support of the paradigm. So this is the issue: is it's the main narrative, all right, given through let's say through politics, requires conspiracy, requires investing in the cabal. It requires always to buttress, to maintain, say, the architecture for this thing. So they are value adds, as I always say. So because it's, if you think that you've gone from mass media and through the internet, you've proliferated different ways for people to be orientated towards understanding the world, then you're ultimately going to cater for that in a way that maintains ultimately narrative, all right, that excludes questioning, all right. So this is the issue here. And so this enables people to invest, because let's say, for instance, that you invest in conspiracy is a classic one. It's not to say that there isn't one, but this is the issue: is the way how people invest themselves in their legitimacy, because through doing so, there's a disavowed responsibility for your existential plight. So what you do is you externalize the issue, and so you're given a narrative in order for you to entrain your captivation with something that would ultimately is an opportunity cost. All right. So this is the problem here: is that it provides the say the binary, or what would be the dialectic that you need. So if you have mainstream and then you have obviously what is alternative, well, they bound together. And so what happens there? Well, I always say that wherever you've got a dialectic, wherever you've got a dialectic, what underwrites that is obviously what you don't question. So once again, that you're a credit instrument, if you don't know how you produce yourself, is through the Faust impact or existential arbitrage, and that's predicated upon an absence of creativity or agency, then ultimately what happens is that toing and froing, or that pitting against, obviously is a way for you to invest in the self where you feel that something is at stake. Now, what's the stake though? If the stake is in reference to what you don't question, then ultimately you're staking the buyer's journey through it. And that's how audience capture works. So that's why the off message doesn't have an audience, because it's totally fucking off. I mean, people don't ask the question of the way how they produce themselves as a consumer, and because it has no audience. Because, well, how can it have an audience? Because it's not prone to any form of capture, because it's totally outside the realms, or outside the bounds of our understanding of questioning, as it were. And so any form of gnosis, let's say, in the context of, say, a deep fake, is in reference to the NPC, but then that all that does is that a false dichotomy, like a deep fake? Well, ultimately not, because nobody would say that they're a deep fake when they presuppose that they have a handle on the way how the world works, ultimately. And you would have to say, well, of course. And so therefore people get sold to themselves otherwise, and that's half the problem. So nobody's going to say that they're an NPC, and nobody's going to say they're a deep fake. So you can see that the progression from one to the other, you can't, there's no distinction. You won't be able to tell, because what you're doing is that you'll have, let's say, for instance, you've got one person that's offering a certain narrative. It's always like, if we relate it to politics, it's the easiest one. And then you've got another one, and they're pitting against each other. One obviously accuses the other of being the same thing, yet both of them are bound together. All right, so in the way how that you can look at the progression from an NPC to a deep fake is to give a broader perspective beyond, say, that false dichotomy, or that the dialectic, as it were, between any left, right, boomer, say millennial, or whatever. What you're doing is that you're getting a broader perspective to it. Now, the perspective is in reference to the credit instrument. Both of them are. Because like if you're looking at from a useful idiot perspective, well, all of them are useful idiots. So a narrative that's in reference to a cabal strengthens ultimately power centers as well. Because once again, you're externalizing the issue and you're not addressing it from your existential status or what drives your actions, as it were. So, which is a spiritual question. So you can say, so in that way, the only way that you can get a perspective on an NPC and say a deep fake is if you obviously are asking the questions that we are asking, which is how do you produce yourself as a consumer and all that stuff, because that gives you a perspective that both are credit instruments. Now, if you know that obviously what underwrites the whole paradigm, all right, being commercial is not goods and services, but you're the principal product, and you start to question that, then ultimately that enables you to get perspective on the realm, as it were, the whole paradigm, in a way where you can see it for what it is. And so therefore, obviously, you're not going to engage in any mainstream or aberrant or what would be alternative narrative, because you'll understand when you understand ultimately the issue is a spiritual question. Now, why is that important? Well, if you have that perspective, then the orientation is towards other people that understand that. That's why I always say that it's critical for people to ask this question of other people, because if you, through asking it, you see the conversation that you will share, and that gives you the perspective on basically this in a way that potentializes what becomes a commonality, which the commonality is in reference to a spirituality and to a spirit of a people, and ultimately to a praxis.